Hey friends, before we get into it here, I did want to let you know we will be doing a Thanksgiving live show again this year. The evening of Thanksgiving, November 24th at 10 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be live on Spreaker. The guests will be two friends of mine who are trans women who are in the closet to one degree or another. We're going to talk about the family dynamics, how awkward that can make things, and what it feels like to be in the closet in those situations. And aside from that, just sort of commiserate and try to have some fun and support and love on each other. So please join us. The URL's really long. Just go to Spreaker.com, search for the Gaytheist Manifesto at 10 p.m. the evening of Thanksgiving, November 24th.
Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Stillman. Ari, what is up?
The sky.
Oh, gosh, that was clever. Oh, yeah, you clever fiend, you.
I am.
So,
my mommy always told me I was real smart.
I mean, she was right. Yeah.
Why do you sound a little hesitant when you say that? I mean, I guess.
So I think it's probably pretty obvious what we're going to be talking about here today. So
what else?
The name of the episode is The Good Guys Fight Back. And there have been massive protests and demonstrations, outpourings of love and support for the queer and trans community, for people of color, in the wake of the election. And so a lot of people posting on Facebook that they were going to be attending protests in various places across the country. And so we recruited a couple of correspondents for the show. I think we've finally arrived when we can say we have correspondents for the show now, which is so into it. So I want to give a thanks up top to Justin Clark and Richard Sturt for taking the time, when they're at the protest to talk with people, to get perspective. And honestly, the things were really well done. Given the format of the episode, I can't really, don't really have time to play literally everything of all of they got, but I mean, they asked great questions and it was really good stuff. So I definitely want to give a huge shout out to them at the top of the show. So, What I kind of want to talk about at the top here is I think it's important. Like let's just talk about where we're at. Ari, do you want to go? It's right now. It is Sunday, so it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So 5 days after the election, because I can count.
Yes.
So you want to just take a minute and just talk about kind of where you're at, where you've been.
Especially the first day after the election was really hard for me. Because it was like, it really does feel like grieving. I've heard a lot of people, compare it to grieving, and it does feel like that because it's like all of a sudden this country that I thought I knew is taken away from me. I thought that I lived in a country where people valued each other's differences, where people valued equality. And of course, there are some people who didn't, but I felt like the majority of people are working towards the greater good. And, this is the country that taught me the values that I hold. So, there must be a big amount of people out there who feel the same way I do. And I found out that that's not necessarily the case, that there is, 47% of the people who voted, or however much it was, don't hold the same values that I hold, and don't necessarily, either they're openly antagonistic towards people who are different from them, or they just don't care. They just are worried about themselves and what's going to benefit them. So it was really difficult for me to reconcile that. And I was feeling really hopeless. Like, I don't know if America can be saved at this point. I don't know if there's anything more we can do. I don't know if I should just get out while I can. Of course, I can't at the moment because I don't have the money, but I was thinking like maybe I'll apply to grad schools outside the country, because I just don't know if there's anything that we can do at this point to stop America from going down the path that it's on. And, I had my grieving, and I talked to people and saw what people were saying. And I came to the conclusion that, in the future, maybe I might, if things keep going the way that I think that they're going, maybe I might have to leave. But at this moment, I'm relatively safe. And there are people who aren't going to be safe, who don't have the option of leaving. And I need to stay here and do what I can to help make things better for them. And hopefully, take our country back. I hate to use that phrase.
Yeah.
It's a really, I don't know how to say it without sounding like a conservative douche, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I realized, and it took me a minute, because obviously I was not really thinking rationally. It was just more of a like, oh my God, what are we going to do kind of thing. But I think the realization that I came to is things are different now, because up until the election, it felt like, even with all of the bad stuff that was happening, and there was still plenty of bad stuff, but it still felt like we were on the upswing, that we were on the side who was winning. So that context made those things not quite as bad. If I heard somebody at work say something silly, I could easily brush it off as, because like, that's not where things are going. Like, your generation's dying out. The people who think like you are going away. So I don't really have to care about it as much. And that's completely and utterly changed now. I told this story in the monologue before the last episode. I saw people posting such awfully scary things on Facebook about where they were at and the thoughts that they were having. And I thought, like, I don't know what else to do. So I put out a blanket invitation for people in the area, if they wanted to come, stay at my house for the night, if they didn't feel safe being alone. That was something that I felt like I could do. That was something that I could do, that I could sort of hold on to and be in control of. And two people did, a friend of Celeste's and a friend of mine both did. And I mean, it was some of the most heartbreaking conversations I've ever had in my life. Like, the things that people are thinking about now are things that people shouldn't ever have to be thinking about. Like, do I have to make this major healthcare decision before I'm ready, because I'm not going to have the option in the future? And just so much fear and justified fear. I mean, this isn't just, well, they're promoting policies that have this unintended side effect. Like, these people have literally promised to make our lives harder. And that's the thing that just kept echoing in my head. So yeah, I spent a couple of days just kind of in shock and in mourning, and I don't mean shock as in I was completely surprised, because this country is racist and sexist and xenophobic largely, and none of that's new. But I think it's sort of been taken to a new level. It's been brought out more into the public, and I think that's sort of what's different, and why it sort of feels more visceral, I guess, is the way to describe it.
Yeah, there's no hiding from it anymore.
Right, exactly. And so yeah, it's just, it was really rough, the first couple of days. And then, starting really yesterday and a little bit the day before, that sort of started to turn for me. And I feel like I'm in fighting mode now. Like, I'm ready to just go out and get shit done and make things happen. And it sucks, because there's so much ahead that we're not going to be able to control. But, we need to identify those little things that we can, and do what we can to take a hold of them, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I'm definitely right there with you. I've definitely renewed my commitment to doing more activism than I had in the past. With this election, and with, going back to therapy and my health starting to improve, I'm really looking forward to being able to do more things to help whoever needs help. So
all of the things.
Yes.
And so, as I said before, these protests are massive, and they are almost entirely peaceful. There was definitely vandalism and property damage, and I'm not so much behind that. But they were almost entirely peaceful. And the protests that I went to in Cincinnati, there were even people who kind of started to get rowdy, and the organizers of the protest shouted them down. So,
hey, cut that out.
Right. It was that kind of thing. And so, the day after the election, almost immediately, people were reporting on social media about being harassed and being bullied and threatened and even assaulted. And so we're going to kind of go through that kind of stuff. So one of the correspondents we mentioned at the top of the show, Richard Sturt, called up with Cameron Brewer. Brewer is a board member of Black Lives Matter Oklahoma.
My name is Cameron Brewer. I am a member, board director, and social media coordinator for Black Lives Matter Oklahoma. In the past, since Tuesday, there's been about 200 instances of violence against people of color, people in the LGBT community, women, Muslim Americans, and this is just in the week following Trump's election, and that's I think that's very telling to me about what his rhetoric has stoked and what his message has promoted in the American spirit.
And the number that he refers to in that clip actually comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center. As of November 12th, they've counted 201 reports of hate crimes. In the interest of being honest, they are not 100% all from Trump supporters. There have been people who were against Trump who have, assaulted and damaged property, people with Trump stickers on their cars and that kind of thing. There's an article on the website heavy.com, and I'll put the link in the show notes to the article that kind of goes through state by state and details the report of all of the hate crimes from around the country. And obviously some of these are going to remain unsubstantiated because sometimes there are no police reports. And of course, given that, the big police unions endorse Trump, and the, relations between police and the black community and the Muslim community and the LGBT community, I'm not exactly blaming people for being hesitant to come forward.
Definitely. There have been lots of reports of different kinds of crimes against marginalized people. There was a student at San Diego State University who was Muslim and wearing a hijab, who was at her car in a parking lot, and she was targeted because she was wearing a hijab and her car keys were stolen. There
was a student at a high school called Shasta High School in Redding, California, that actually printed out and passed out deportation letters to other students and actually put a video of it on Twitter. So this isn't just someone telling stories.
There was also the UK Daily Mail reported that there was a Muslim teacher in Georgia who was told to hang herself with her headscarf because it would no longer be allowed after Donald Trump's election.
There was the report of racist graffiti that was found scrawled in the bathroom of a Minnesota high school. There are pictures floating around Twitter. I'm not going to repeat what it says because it is awful. But the graffiti did include the "Make America Great Again" with some seriously white supremacist comments and racial slurs. The bathroom door had the word Trump on it and said "whites only." And, we could go on from there. Like I said, there are hundreds and hundreds of these, but you kind of get the idea. And this actually hasn't stayed out of my own personal circles either. A friend of Celeste's woke up and there was a picture on Facebook that she had posted where somebody had written the word faggot on her car window. And I got yelled at by somebody on the phone at work, which this is a smaller instance for sure, but I was like, it still touched me a little bit. They had to speak with one of our outsourced call centers, and he came in just screaming about how he was going to write to Trump, and Trump was going to make outsourcing illegal, which is rich, given the fact that that's a thing that Trump apparently really loves to do.
Yeah, I've also had friends who have had instances of that. There was a friend of mine in Arkansas who is not Muslim, and she's white, so she doesn't even have the brown skin to be targeted for, but she was wearing a scarf loosely over her head because of the cold weather, and she was harassed for that. People hurling anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim slurs at her. And, even outside of the more specific instances of harassment and crimes, there are so many people that I've talked to who have lost relationships with their family and some of their friends because they just don't feel safe around them anymore. They either voted for Trump, or if they didn't vote for Trump, they're just denying and downplaying the safety concerns and the concerns for people's rights that people have. And, the election has emboldened people to be a lot more open in their bigotry than before. And people that, people thought they could trust, they're learning that they maybe can't trust them anymore, and they're not safe to be around. And, in one way that's kind of a good thing, because then it's easier to spot that kind of a person and to remove them from your life if you can, or avoid them as much as possible. But if that's a family member or a friend that has these opinions that you didn't realize that they had, and now they're emboldened to speak out about that, of course, really painful to lose the relationship that you thought you had with that person.
Yeah, my Facebook friend count has definitely dwindled a little bit in the wake of this whole thing. And it's most like I mostly excise the people from my life who would have been like enthusiastic Trump supporters. But, you know, people who are saying like, oh, calm down, everybody's overreacting, you're being a bunch of whiny babies, that kind of stuff. Like, I'm over it. I'm done with it. And so, of course, in the wake of all of this, people are scared. And, you know, I've said it on the show before that I'm more afraid of Trump on a cultural level than a policy level. I think Pence is kind of the real horror show when it comes to policy. But I mean, and that's not to say that Trump is great on policy. You know, the Affordable Care Act, not a super great law by any stretch, but it definitely has helped some people. And an example of that,
a lot of people, I would say.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, there were definitely a lot of people left behind, and I think that's important to talk about. But there have been people who are helped, and that's a story that doesn't get told. So our correspondent, Justin Clark, caught up with a woman who was afraid of losing her insurance that she uses to cover her daughter.
I'm Shelley Campbell, and this is my daughter, Abby. Abby has diabetes. She came down with diabetes when she was 2, and the kind of diabetes she has means that she has to take insulin every day to live. And insulin without insurance costs $380 a month when you're 2. When you're 9, it costs twice that, and when you're 13, it quadruples. And until 2013, we charged it because we wanted our daughter to live, and we weren't allowed to have insurance because she's a pre-existing condition.
Jesus, can you imagine how heartbreaking that is?
Yeah, for people who live outside the U.S., basically what she's talking about there is that before the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies were allowed to turn you down for insurance because you have a pre-existing condition. So basically, if you have any reason to need to use the insurance on a regular basis, they can tell you, no, you can't have the insurance. And part of the Affordable Care Act was banning that. The insurance companies were no longer allowed to turn you down for having a condition that you need insurance for. And of course, diabetes is one of those conditions. It's a chronic condition that requires a lot of care and medication in some instances. And if the Affordable Care Act gets repealed, people who have chronic illnesses, you know, they might lose their coverage. They might not be able to afford the treatments that they need in order to survive. And that's really, really scary and could be really devastating to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who recently beat leukemia, and she's cancer free now. And she told me straight up, she's like, I don't see how I would be alive if I didn't have Obamacare. So, you know, needless to say, obviously people are not in the best of places at the moment. So, we're going to hear Shelley talk a little bit more about that here.
We're really scared. We pleaded for years, you know, please let us buy healthcare. Please let us take our kid to the doctor. And she said, we'll pay anything we can for insurance. We don't care what it costs. And we weren't allowed it. I had to buy insulin on the black market. I'll have to drive to Canada to buy her medicine or move there. I won't be able to live here without insurance with my daughter. I can't afford it.
Like, I want to reiterate here that we just heard a mother say that she had to go to the black market to buy medicine for her daughter in the richest country in the goddamn world. Like, let that sink in. You know?
For her medical condition, not buying recreational drugs, buying insulin that this girl needs to stay alive.
Right. And in the interest of having all of the information, you know, it's been reported almost immediately that Trump has sort of walked back because, you know, at his rallies, he was all like, we're getting rid of Obamacare. The whole thing's going away. And, you know, people were afraid of that. And now he's sort of walked that back. And he said that there's some of it that's really good. And I think the two specific things that he has said that he wants to keep are the requirement to cover those with pre-existing conditions, which is a good thing, and letting children stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26. And those are good things. I wasn't really able to find any more details than that. So, like, I don't know. I can't imagine that any changes he makes will be good ones. So I'm still pretty nervous. And Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, one of my least favorite human beings on the planet, she actually told CNN recently that there may be a special session on Inauguration Day to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which, like, we should point out here that there's no need for a quote special session since Congress is in session year round. But
theoretically,
I guess
not that they work every day or even half the days.
But I guess we have to get used to the idea that our president doesn't know how the government works.
Right.
So I guess that's just a thing we're going to have to just work with at this point.
Yeah. And even with Trump, we have no way of knowing what Trump's going to do. He changes his policies just according to whatever he thinks is going to make him more popular. So until it happens, we're not really going to know. But, now the Congress is entirely Republican controlled, and they have been bent on repealing Obamacare since its inception. So it's...
Yeah, important to point out, they actually sent a bill to President Obama to repeal it, and he vetoed it. So this has already happened in Congress, even before we lost the majorities that we had. Right.
So even outside of Trump, just the Congress itself is something to worry about. It's not looking good in that area. So a lot of sources are recommending that if you have any kind of benefits and you've been putting off any kind of medical care, or there's anything you can do to plan for the future, please do it, because we really don't know what's going to happen next year. There's a lot of concern about women's reproductive rights. They're thinking about possibly putting more restrictions on abortion, which would be horrifying. And another part of the Affordable Care Act is that insurance has to pay or at least partially cover birth control, and that might be off the table next year. So if you use birth control, you might want to consider getting an IUD in the next few months, because those can last for up to 10 years. So if the flying spaghetti monster is not charitable to us and there's a 2-term Trump presidency, that'll last you through that and more. And there's a lot of concerns for trans people as well, because, again, if the Affordable Care Act is repealed, your insurance can deny you certain types of care based on you being transgender. So there's a big push, which we're going to talk about a little later, for trans people to get their documents in order. So if you've been putting off your name change or your legal gender marker change, please try and get those in order as soon as possible, because we don't know what could possibly happen with that.
Right. Yeah. So going along with the idea that, we don't really know what's going to happen to LGBTQ equality under President Trump. And I think that may be one of the scariest things, right? Is that we don't really know. We know that Mike Pence would be an absolute nightmare. Like, if he had the power to do what he wanted, it would be, nothing but the most awful of things. But Trump he said some conflicting things. I mean, he initially came out against HB2. He initially said that he didn't really care to do much about the Supreme Court decision. But of course, when he's in a room full of conservative voters, he says other things. So it's really tough to know exactly what he's going to do. Because, I mean, honestly, I don't think he really cares about LGBT stuff. I think he is happy to just forget about the entire thing and just leave things as they are. So, what he follows through on, we don't really know. On that subject, our correspondent Richard Sturt talked to Paula Sophia Schonauer. She's with Freedom Oklahoma, which is an LGBTQ rights group there in Oklahoma.
Paula Sophia Schonauer. I'm speaking for the transgender community with Freedom Oklahoma.
And she used some pretty strong words to describe the way that she feels.
It's deeply distressing. It feels, especially a couple days ago, it felt like an existential threat to the transgender community.
And I want to reiterate that she used the phrase existential threat. And frankly, I don't think that's exaggerating all of that much. I mean, there were the rumors flying around that trans kids had committed suicide on election night. And I got to point out that a lot of that's still unconfirmed. We don't necessarily have any firsthand accounts of that happening. So, that may or may not have been the case. The numbers may be different. But honestly, given the conversations that I've had with people and the things that I've seen people saying, I really honestly do not find it hard to believe that the election would have been enough to put people over the edge.
Yeah, that is true. The trans community is, it's been hurting for a long time, even before this, and people have felt unvalued and and maybe even hated and feeling like they don't have a way to improve their situation because of concerns for their safety or their finances. And this just could, this is a further confirmation of that sort of helplessness, that half or more of this country doesn't care about them or actively opposes them. And we were seeing some progress with anti-discrimination protections and that sort of thing, but it was, kind of small and slow. And now all of that could be taken away just in the blink of an eye. And, people are feeling really hopeless about it because queer and trans people in general tend to be less financially secure, and people don't have the luxury of being able to leave the country if their health care gets taken away, or if there's a safety concern. They may not feel that they have the resources to leave. So I can definitely understand people feeling really hopeless in this situation and feeling like there's no point in going on.
Yeah, and a lot of people are worried about their friends and family too. It's not just people in the community, but our allies and our loved ones are worried about us too. At a rally in Indianapolis, Justin Clark spoke with Michael Dutcher, who talked about his concerns for what his loved ones are going through.
I mean, there's just so much hurting right now. I mean, I have immediately family members that are part of the LGBTQ community, and there's just so much pain, so much suffering going on from people that feel like they have no place in this country right now. So yeah, I mean, I really just want to be here for them, make sure people know that they're welcome here, and I want to make a change.
And along those lines, I think one of the silver linings to come out of this whole thing that's been pretty amazing to see is just the sheer number of people who have reached out to check on me, and people that I've seen checking on each other,
yes.
Doing everything that they can to support and love on each other. Have you experienced that too?
Yeah, I definitely have. And that has been, the one thing that has really gotten me through, this terrible news is seeing people support one another, and even allies just making their anger and their sadness known, and being a part of a support network for people who are directly affected by this. And even, people in marginalized groups supporting each other. Not just saying, oh, it's going to be okay, because we don't really know if it's going to be okay, but just to be there to listen to one another and to express their emotions to one another and to offer help with resources. I've seen it in my local trans community, a lot of leaning on each other for emotional support and getting together, just being with people who understand, getting help with practical resources. And it's just really helpful to know that you're not going through it alone, and there's going to be people that are going to help in any way that they can.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of been a little overwhelming, and part of me feels bad because I'm responding to messages 2 or 3 days after people send them, because it's a lot to sift through. So I want to put out there, if you're a person who's a listener to the show, and you've sent one of those messages that I haven't responded to, I have read them all. And they've absolutely meant the world to me. I've just obviously had a lot going on. I haven't had the chance to respond to everyone, and I feel bad about that. But it's seriously appreciated.
And it goes the other way too, with people being there to listen to us, because we've been hurting and reached out to people to help us. People, our family, our partners, our friends, and our communities. And I even had an experience with my therapist. I had a therapy session the Thursday after the election, and my therapist happens to be queer, which is awesome for me because, that's something that I feel like she understands me on. And usually you think of your therapist as kind of a little bit detached or neutral, or being kind of an authority figure to help guide you through whatever problems are happening to you, and not really getting personally involved. But at our session, we just kind of spent the first 15 minutes just venting to each other about our fears and our emotions about what had happened. And it was really comforting for me to know that she was feeling and thinking a lot of the same things that I was. And just talking about it doesn't really solve any of the problems, but it does help me feel like my emotions and my thoughts are valid, and they're legitimate, and they're being shared by other people who are in similar situations.
Absolutely. And so before we move on and start talking about sort of where we go from here, there was one other really kind of scary incident of queer antagonism that I heard about. I spoke with Holly O'Neill, who is a resident of Rochester, New York.
I live in Rochester, New York, and after election night, it was either the night of election night or the early morning following, 2 members of my community in North Winton, Rochester, New York, had their pride flags burned.
And I think the community's response was absolutely beautiful.
The mood was wonderful. It was really loving, supportive, reminding each other that that's not who we are, and say, I'll be there for you no matter what. And the woman who organized it, Mary Moore, her number one thing was to have these people not feel afraid in their homes. And my sister is trans. Almost my entire friends, family, community, all of that is on some form of the spectrum of LGBTQA or minorities, immigrants, et cetera, and especially for me, the deaf community. So this hurt, and to be there and be surrounded by so many loving people.
It's really nice to hear those sorts of stories because, it's really hard to learn, as we learned in this election, that half the country is either openly antagonistic towards you or just doesn't even care about your well-being. But it's so important to remember that we still have our local communities, we still have our friends and family to lean on, and that there are always going to be people there who are going to support you and be there for you, and that there's hope for change in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good segue into, how we start talking about how we fix things. One of the more frustrating things that you always hear in these situations is people telling other people that, how you're activisting and how you're reacting, it's all wrong. And I've seen people on our side of the ideological divide calling these protesters whiny babies. I even saw the phrase marching idiots. And I could go on forever about why I think that's a really shitty way to think. But our correspondents and I actually put those questions to protest goers at the events that we attended this weekend. So Ashley Harrington is a member and an organizer on the steering committee for Black Lives Matter Cincinnati. Now, BLM was actually out in force that day, mainly to respond to the mistrial verdict in the case of Ray Tenzing shooting and killing Sam DuBose. And so I talked to her as well.
Masses of people in the street do accomplish things. When we look at our history, when we look at the civil rights movement, what actually got any sort of laws passed was masses of people in the street, organized movements that we have seen time and time again that actually push the system to think that if we don't respond, the social uproar will get worse. And so that we know that mass disciplined rallies do make a difference. And so we hope that today our numbers were pretty large, but we hope to grow those even larger to a point that the city can't ignore us, and that the city realizes that if we don't say something, there can literally be a mass social uproar.
And I've done some looking into this, and the facts do actually seem to support what she's saying. Generally speaking, when you look at situations surrounding issues where, people are trying to make some sort of social change, large and peaceful demonstrations do seem to help. And the key there being that they have to be large and they have to be peaceful. So I think it's like super self-defeating. Everybody's like, well, protests never do anything. And it's like, well, they don't do anything if people don't show up, and you're not showing up because it's a circular thing. So numbers matter. There were thousands of us. I have to think it was thousands. It was hard to tell being in the crowd, but marching through the streets in force in Cincinnati peacefully, I don't see a way where that doesn't change someone's mind or make someone think twice. I don't know.
Yeah, I think she's absolutely right. She mentioned the civil rights movement for African Americans. There's a huge protest factor in there. There are lots of other examples in our country's history: women's suffrage, the queer and trans rights movement, now Black Lives Matter. All of these have had a huge factor of protest to them, and that's a big reason for a lot of the progress that we've achieved, because it's large groups of people coming together, putting their voice towards the common cause and letting their government and letting everyone around them know what their views are and what their demands are for their rights.
Yeah, Kate Fulgham is the president of Oklahoma Atheists, and she actually makes a really good point about awareness.
I think they're valuable because they raise awareness for the cause that they're protesting. And I guess in particular right now, these are a lot of anti-Trump protests, and it makes, the world aware that we disagree with how the election turned out, not because of sour grapes or sore loser, but we're worried about all the campaign promises that he made.
Yeah, she mentioned their, sore loser, and that is a narrative that I've heard, as you mentioned before, even among liberals and progressives, saying like these protests are just people whining and complaining that they didn't get their way and that they lost, and what we need to do is come together and respect the president, because the Republicans spent 8 years, protesting and blocking Obama on everything that he wanted to do, and we don't want to be like that. And I definitely see what they're saying with the Republicans, but the difference here is that what the Republicans were doing to Obama was based on absolutely no evidence. It was, fear-mongering about communism and socialism and Islam taking over the country, where there was absolutely no evidence that Obama wanted to do anything of the sort. And these protests are based on Trump's own words and actions, things that he has said about, his policies, and the people that he has decided to ally himself with, who are known adversaries to equal rights for all sorts of different types of people. So people are just being public and vocal about the abuses that they've suffered and the abuses that they see coming. And that's a vital way to signal to the government that they need to represent all Americans, not just, the white, straight Christians. And it also gets the attention, again, of onlookers who wouldn't otherwise be affected by this sort of thing. They're seeing people out there protesting, people who are concerned, and people are going to realize that this is actually a big issue. Yeah, and for Cameron Brewer, who is with Oklahoma Black Lives Matter, for him it's more like solidarity and coalition building.
I think they're valuable for two reasons. One, they allow people to come together and see that they're not alone. And there's people come together and see that they're not just isolated by their in their own sort of space of like feeling vulnerable or afraid, and allow people to come together for community and really just experience that sort of like that self-care that they need to like feel better about themselves and feel better and feel safe, honestly, to feel safe. Additionally, I think it's a good for coalition building. I've been making friends all day with people from like various different groups and organizations. We've been talking about continuing this movement, continuing the rally, continuing to come together and protest against Donald Trump and against some of the racism that's been going on, against some of the sexism, against some of the homophobia, transphobia, and just really doing our part to come together and make this make some substantive change happen, and continue pushing forward and not wavering in our movement. So yeah, and for Troy Stevenson, the director of Freedom Oklahoma, it's about catharsis and catharsis with the knowledge that our actions can't just end with the protests.
I think at the moment they're valuable. They're cathartic. They're good for people to come together. People need to be around like-minded people. They need to have community. But I think the only way they will actually be effective is if there's action taken afterwards. If people put down the protest signs and pick up clipboards and start registering voters and activating voters and making sure that in the communities we call home, we're electing the right people with the right agenda to make the laws that actually affect our community the most.
And a man who declined to give his name was actually really unhappy with the way the protests are characterized in the media.
They pretend they know better, that the purpose of the demonstrations is to stop Trump from getting in office. Realistic people know that that's not going to happen. Now, perhaps he may be impeached for actions he may do in the future, but what we're doing is building the groundwork to oppose those incredibly bad policies.
And this was echoed by Jose, who is someone that I spoke to at the Cincinnati protest.
The problem nowadays, even from social media, from our current media in general, like they put things on television, they put things on like our computer screens on our social media sites that portrays that what we're doing right now is negative, and it's not that. Like it's a completely different thing from being there and seeing it on TV.
The thing that I kept seeing over and over and over again was that people understood that these protests were not necessarily an end unto themselves, right? This was the organizing and the galvanizing action that leads to other actions. It's about coalition building. It's about identifying your allies. It's about inspiring and energizing people. Now, of course, I obviously only talked to like a handful of people out of the thousands. Hopefully it was hard to tell. Again, it had to have been thousands of people that were there, but the ones I talked to really actually seemed ready to do the work. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who go to these protests and pat themselves on the back for having activisted well and go home and never do anything else. And that's valid. There are people that do that. but I still don't necessarily think that's the worst thing. In my mind, at the very least, those people, hopefully, are going to act differently in their personal lives. They're going to treat people differently at work. They're going to treat strangers differently. And that stuff still counts.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really important to note, is that protesting and petitioning your government and even running for office yourself, if that's something that you are able to do, is huge things that you can do to help. But a lot of people aren't able to do that for a lot of different reasons. And they also have a big role to play, because I think the biggest battle that we need to fight is changing the culture that is leading to these policies and these sorts of politicians getting elected. And, legal protections are really important, but just legal and political action isn't necessarily going to change the social climate. And that's something that can only be achieved on an individual level, talking to people in your life, convincing them of the need for greater empathy and of greater understanding. And if you can even get one person thinking in a different way, even if you don't necessarily change their mind outright, just thinking about these things, that could have a big impact in their life, in your life, and in the lives of everyone who interacts with that person. And I also want to note that not everyone is able to do that as well. And it's really important to remember to take care of yourself, because the whole point of this cause is to improve the lives of marginalized people. And if you're a marginalized person, then whatever well-being looks like to you, that's what matters. If it means that you need to step away from any kind of activism, even in your personal life, just for your own health and your well-being, that's also important.
I think this applies to allies too. Because people have empathy and people care, and people put a lot of themselves into this cause, and even if they're not necessarily affected by transphobia or homophobia or racism, those things can still be really tough to deal with. So my whole thing is that you're a kind of person that people would rather not be okay, would rather go away. So taking care of yourself is activism. And it's vital activism, because you're important, and what you do matters, and we need people in the fight. And you're not good to anyone if you're burnt out and exhausted and you can't engage anymore. So so self-care is vital. And so of course now the real question is, what do we do? Right. And I think some of our protest goers actually had really great thoughts on that. So I
have an idea of what we can do, Callie.
Oh God, here we go.
Can we burn this shit down? Is that a good idea?
Like that Winnie the Pooh meme? Oh, just Google the Winnie the Pooh meme about burning
Pooh,
things.
That's not honey. That's homophobia.
Oh God. So some of our protest goers had some really great thoughts on the idea of moving forward. And again, this is Cameron Brewer of Black Lives Matter Oklahoma.
I have the saying, I don't get mad, I get motivated. So I'm as passionate as ever about making change happen. As long as we can band together and realize that we're all in sort of the same, dealing with some of the same threat here. We stay together. We create safe spaces for everyone. I'm a black straight man, and I'm doing my best to promote the women in my life. I'm doing my best to promote the trans folks in my life. I'm doing my best to promote the queer folks in my life. I'm doing my best to make sure that those people feel safe around me and feel like they have a voice and can be heard whenever pain is being expressed.
And Troy Stevenson of Freedom Oklahoma sounded a note of worry about the trans community. So it's a lot of the stuff that we've already been talking about.
Well, right now, dependent on what a Trump administration does, there could be a lot of executive orders that directly affect the transgender community. And I think that has to be our first worry, is what is done and how we go back and get those protections back in place.
And he also gives an important reminder that we still have local elections to consider.
Then we have to elect locally legislators that believe in transgender equality, so that we can pass protections for them.
And I think that's really important to remember, because if we fight, we may still be able to get things done at state and local levels. I mean, the city of Cincinnati banned conversion therapy. The state of Ohio wouldn't get it done. The federal government wouldn't get it done. So at least Cincinnati was like, you know what? We're going to go ahead and take the initiative on this. And obviously that's insufficient. We need a federal law banning conversion therapy. Frankly, we're not going to get it in at least 2 years, probably not 4 years. But that doesn't mean that we can't still do the good that we can where we can. That's obviously not where we want to be, but I think we have to be real about where we are, and I think that at least is a thing that we can shoot for.
Yeah, we were really hoping with the new administration to come that we would finally get some federal protections for queer and trans people, which are not currently on the books federally. And of course, that doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. But we still have the state and local governments that can pass anti-discrimination laws and make things safer for the people who live there and the people who work there and even the people who visit there. There are lots of cities and states that already have those kind of protections, and that's not necessarily going to change just because of a Trump presidency. But there are lots of other places that don't. There are many states where discriminating against someone just based on their sexuality or their gender identity is perfectly legal, and you can be fired from your job, you can be denied access to housing, access to health care, all sorts of things. And that's something that we really need to move forward on because, apparently we're not going to be getting any federal protections anytime soon. So we need to be looking at what we can do, and what we can do is things on the state and local level.
Yeah, and I also wanted to talk about some practical things that people are doing to help people in need and that have really impressed me. So Alex, I don't want to give last name because I haven't got permission to do that, but Alex is a trans man who has decided to help trans folks with ID documents. And I'm sure we've talked about this on the show before, but I really don't think that we can understate how important it is for trans folks to have correct and accurate identity documents. And those really aren't so easy to obtain. I mean, in Ohio, you can't amend your birth certificate for any reason at all. And so Alex decided that he was going to help some folks through that process, and then ran into some people who needed help, but also couldn't afford the fees involved. So he was like, cool, let's do this. He started a GoFundMe to help fund people getting the documents they need, because to someone like me or someone who is more relatively middle class, these fees may not be prohibitive, but let's remember that many or most trans people are affected by poverty, underemployment, unemployment. So, sometimes $100, that's a lot of money. That's an unobtainable goal for some people. And that's something that we have to realize. So this thing, for someone like me, this isn't a ton of money, but it can be a ton of money. It can do a ton of good for someone who needs it. And so he started a GoFundMe to raise money for this. And the link is going to be in the show notes in the description. I definitely encourage you, if you've got some extra cash, to definitely throw it his way, because that's awesome work.
Yeah, there's someone here locally who's personally offering to fund people who need to have their names changed and their gender markers changed and get a passport. And I have a few people in my local trans community who are going to take advantage of that, because there are, for example, college students, or one is an 18-year-old who's still living with his parents who aren't supportive, and they need to get their documents changed, as soon as possible, hopefully before January, and they just don't have the money for it. So, it's really thanks to people like this person and Alex that they're going to be able to do that. And I'm sure that there are people all over the country who are doing similar things. If it's not any sort of, organized effort, I'm sure there are people out there who are willing to do that. So if you need any kind of help with money, or you don't know where to get started on getting your name and all your other documents changed, reach out to whatever trans organization is closest to you and see what's available. There might be someone there who can help you with money. If not, there's definitely someone there who's going to be able to help you with the process of doing it and making things as easy as possible for you. And just don't be afraid to ask for help, because people are here to help you.
Yeah, and in the email, if you're a person who's listening and you actually need this help, if you need some assistance either with the process of getting it done or with money getting it done, transidhelp@gmail.com is the email address. And again, we'll have the link to the GoFundMe if you want to try and help Alex with what he's doing. I'll have the GoFundMe link in the show notes for that. And I think there's this idea that support has to be some sort of grandiose gesture, and that's not always the case. I mean, this is a discussion of something very, very simple. that someone's like, hey, you know what? I went through this process and I feel like I did pretty all right. And I kind of know what I'm doing here. I'm not a lawyer, but that's fine. So maybe I can help someone out. And I always say, everyone needs spreadsheets. Everyone needs Word documents. Everyone needs, logistical help. Everyone needs phone calls made and, facilities cleaned and, different things like that. It doesn't have to be big stuff. And to that effect, there's this really great website that I saw a link for. My friend Zandy posted it, who Zandy's amazing. I love her dearly. And the website's called holyfucktheelection.com.
Yep.
And it's so great. And there's a split. It's 2 sections. There's one section for self-care and there's one for taking action.
The one for self-care is titled "I Need a Fucking Minute," which is wonderful.
I love it so much.
The whole website is just so much swearing and anger, but it's also like, hey, things are going to be okay, damn it. It's got, I'm looking at the self-care section. It says, check this shit out. And it's got a link to a YouTube video of babies and dogs playing together. If you need to just kind of take a moment and just be reminded that there's still good stuff in the world. It says, look at dogs and babies and shit. And there's another link there that says, take fucking care of yourself. And it's got a link to an article about specifically how to practice self-care in the context of the election. And it's got other stuff there about the safety pins. And there's an article there from BuzzFeed about basically don't give up.
Yeah, and the taking action portion, there's areas for giving time and giving money, and I want to reiterate that both of those things are valuable, and we should all be doing both to whatever degree we're able. And obviously, not everyone can. I'm not like activist shaming. I'm just saying if we can, we should, right? So in the activism button is called "fuck shit up." And so you get a couple of options, and there's sections: elect some fucking Democrats, fucking LGBTQ shit, racist motherfuckers, not getting grabbed by the fucking pussy, and the fucking earth is literally going to be on fire. and inside these links, I mean, there are organizations. It's sort of the usual folks that you would, Black Lives Matter, the ACLU, showing up for racial justice, the DNC, maybe not so much the DNC, Planned Parenthood, sort of all the usual players. And I will say I'd make at least 2 changes to the LGBTQ section where at my website. It lists the Human Rights Campaign, the HRC, and I've definitely been convinced of some of their work lately after talking to people and seeing the kind of stuff they do behind the scenes to sort of, kill bad laws, get good laws passed, stuff like that's not super flashy and you don't always necessarily hear about. But they're an organization that does have some serious problems. And I would recommend doing some research. Just Google problems with the Human Rights Campaign and just do some reading and make your own decision. There. And I also think that the Transgender Law Center should be on that list because they're an organization that provides direct legal support for the trans community. So I think that's awesome. The thing that's really sort of inspired me in this whole thing is seeing how people respond. I really think one of the conversations that I had with someone at the protest that I didn't get recorded because my phone was dead because I'm a jerk. We were talking about
That's why it was dead. It died of your jerkness.
Exactly. I killed it.
Here lies Callie's phone.
Right.
If Callie wasn't such a jerk, I'd still be alive.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we were talking about was how important these things are actually for the people there. And how, the protests and that kind of thing, it's not necessarily for everyone else. It's catharsis that we need. It's solidarity that we need. On Tuesday night, I literally felt like the entire world was against me. And in a practical sense, obviously, I know that's not true. The level of support that we have at the show, that I have personally, that our communities have, none of that really changed overnight. But the feeling definitely did. And I think these sorts of protests and the personal reaching out to say, hey, are you okay? And, the messages of support, reminding several people reminded me to take care of myself. And in those situations, I need those reminders. When I'm recording an episode of the show, when I'm talking like this, I'm very rational, I'm very thoughtful, and of course, I need to take a break, I need a breather, I need to go get a glass of water, that kind of stuff. I'm thinking about that kind of things, but in the thick of it, it's really easy to forget that kind of thing. And it's really important. Sometimes it's, let's talk about your emotions and feelings and let's have these heady conversations. And sometimes it's, hey, did you have breakfast today? Did you take a shower today? Did you, X? Those sorts of practical things, those are so vital when people are in vulnerable positions and people are hurting. And I've seen so much of it. And if I can take any hugely amazing thing out of it, it's that. People reminding me that they believe in the work that we do on the show, and that, what we do has become especially important in light of what happened on Tuesday. And it sucks because I don't want that to be the thing. You know what I mean?
The day that this podcast is not necessary will be a happy day.
Right. The episodes over the last month and a half, 2 months have mostly been focused on let's educate, let's have conversations, let's make people feel good about themselves and feel good about each other. And I think that stuff is vitally important. And we're going to keep doing that. I want to point that out because I know there are people who love that about the show, and that's not going to change. That's not going to go away. But we are going to have more stuff like this where we talk about practical ways that people can take action because we have to do it. I would imagine anyone who still listens to this show is someone who actually cares about the well-being of me and Ari and the people in this community who are hurting and who are vulnerable. And we need to step up and do everything that we can. And I'm not asking people to put themselves out there and, hurt yourself, do yourself damage, put your meal ticket in jeopardy, risk everything. Because I don't even think that's necessary. I think if everyone listening to this show gave maybe an hour of their time a week, if you have it, to make phone calls, to offer to sweep the floor somewhere so someone else doesn't have to do it, to make spreadsheets and crunch numbers and just little practical things like that, I think we could be in a much better place.
Just give people a hug, even.
Seriously, and on a personal level, reach out to your friends and your family when people say they're hurting. I know me, as personal as I get on Facebook, sometimes when I talk about how I'm hurting, I don't really say exactly how bad it is. And I have to imagine there are plenty of other people like that. And that doesn't mean crashing into someone's life and making them feel obligated to unload everything on you, because that's labor too, and that can be really tough. I actually had to tell someone at one point, I'm kind of talked out. I really appreciate you reaching out, and it feels good that you care, but I'm talked out. I can't right now. And you have to be willing to accept that as an answer. Because sometimes you just need to step back and take a rest and take a nap or, watch Netflix or watch puppy videos on YouTube. Those kind of things. Those things are necessary. Hugs and love and solidarity, those things aren't necessarily going to be the things that solve our problems. But I think they definitely can help push us through. I'm going to give an example of that happened to me, and then I'll throw it to you, Ari, for your thoughts. So I was at work Wednesday night, and I decided to go to work. I was not feeling like going to work, but I decided to go anyways because I felt like I needed some sense of normalcy. I needed to sort of get back to the routine and feel like, something about the world is still stable, right? So I decided to go to work instead of calling off, and most of the day was fine. Taking phone calls and people at work. Most of the people that I work with are pretty liberal anyway, so we were sort of trying to laugh and sort of commiserate about the whole thing. So I felt pretty okay about it. And then towards the end of the night, this guy gets off, he's on his way out, and he and this other guy are discussing about how, Donald Trump's actually the lesser of two evils. And this girl that I work with, who I love dearly, was trying very sort of gingerly to sort of people are afraid, gay people are, worried about marriages, which in a practical sense, I don't think marriage is going away. I want to put that out there, but people are nervous. And he was really, when did he say that? When did he say it? And I was shaking and I lost it. I turned around and I yelled at the guy, and I was like, he said it in speeches like 3 fucking times. And I realized, like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I'm at work. I can't drop F-bombs really loud at work while people are on the phones. What the hell am I thinking? And thankfully, you know, it was late at night. It was 12:30 and we get off at 1 o'clock. Nobody was on a phone call, so nobody heard anything. Nobody reported anything to my supervisors or anything like that. So, like, that's all okay. But I was really shaken up. And I was just sitting there shaking. And I was just thinking, like, oh my God, I hope I don't get a call, because I really don't think that I can hold it together at this point. Because I identified work a long time ago as a safe place for me. You know, as a trans person, even as an atheist, you know, I felt like even if people didn't agree or whatever, that I was always going to be treated with respect and fairness. And obviously this guy saying something I didn't like is not treating me with respect and fairness. But that affected me. It affected me deeply, because I was like, can I not just get away from this for a day? You know, and so I was really not okay. And my friend that I work with came over to check on me, and she saw the look on my face, and she was like, I'm getting you off the phones. Hold on. And you know, she went in our group chat and she got time for me off the phones. And I went outside of work, sat on the sidewalk, and ugly cried for literally a half hour. And I was out there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and she came out, and she was, and she did literally the perfect thing. She said, hey, I wanted to come check on you. If you need to be alone, I'll totally leave you alone, but I wanted to make sure. And she's like, do you need to be alone? And I just, like, I couldn't even talk. I just shook my head. No, I don't want to be alone. So she sat down next to me and put her arms around me and let me cry on her. And that was such a simple, kind gesture. And at that point, you know, it didn't necessarily change all of the awful emotions that I was feeling, but it made me feel a little bit less hopeless, if that makes sense. Kindness can still be a thing. People can still do good things for each other. And I'm not some unrealistic idealist that thinks like that's literally going to solve all of our problems and everything's going to be okay. But I think that is something that counts. It's something to hold on to. And it's something that matters. So if you're a person who's ever in a position to do that for someone when you notice they're hurting, something very, very simple like that can mean the entire world, because it meant the entire world to me when someone did it for me.
Moop.
Good contribution. Right?
I can't top that. There's no topping that. Just, you know, especially people who aren't necessarily personally affected and aren't having their own emotional energy drained because of this. We are really depending on you in a certain way. Not that you're obligated to do anything, but you know, of course, take care of yourself, and you are a priority as well. But it just means a lot to be able to reach out to people. Even if there's nothing that they can really do to solve the problem, they can't go and, you know, make Trump not be the president anymore. They can't go back in time and rig the election so Hillary wins. They can't change the future on what's going to happen, but they can make you feel safe and loved, and know that no matter what happens in the future, you're still going to have people who love you and people who are going to help you through it. And that, like we've talked about already, that's the big thing that has been the silver lining in this whole thing, is just seeing the outpouring of caring and compassion and people renewing their commitments to activism. I've seen several people already announce that they're going to run for local offices where they live, which is really awesome. I've seen a lot of people you know, start new projects and just really recommit themselves to secular activism, and secular activism that's rooted in social justice. So that, and I personally have been really inspired to do more things, and I'm going to be trying my best as, you know, my health continues to improve and I am able to have harder conversations with people that I wasn't able to have before. I'm going to be doing my best to push myself and to make sure that I do what I can and I don't let my fears get in the way. So, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who has expressed similar sorts of feelings, because it's making me feel that I'll have people who have my back and people that can support me when I am struggling, and when I am feeling like the things that I'm doing aren't enough, or that I should be doing more but I can't. It just really means a lot to know that people are there behind me.
Awesome. Well, before we close the show, I did want to say a quick note about something else that's happened that's very humbling to me, and that in the light of the election, there are lots of people who have decided to become patrons of the show. And normally, in the middle of the show, we do this cutesy sort of spot where, I make jokes about, the forced gay marriages and smuggling penises into the women's restroom and that kind of thing. But I think I want to take this opportunity to let people know how seriously I take that as an investment in the show and what we do and what people think of how valuable what we do is. Because obviously you can give your money to any good cause, and the fact that you've chosen to support us in what we do is humbling, and it's a responsibility that I take incredibly seriously. I've never used a dime of patron money for my own personal benefit. It all goes to either buying equipment for the show, getting us to conferences, that kind of stuff. So it all directly goes back into activism. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone who supported the show from the very beginning, first of all. But also, the folks who have pledged in the last couple of days, Adam, Patrick, Robert, Stacy, Wilco, Richard, Lisa. I can't thank you enough for that investment in what we do, and in the confidence that it says that you have in what we do, and how important you think it is. And that's really humbling. It's a responsibility that I take incredibly seriously, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to do good with the platform that you all have provided for us. So
and the first thing you can do is buy me some ice cream.
Right. Well, next time I'm up near you, I plan to.
Well, I'm part of the cause, and ice cream makes me happy. Therefore, you need to spend the Patreon money on ice cream for me. Okay.
We'll talk off air about that.
I'm getting my ice cream.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to definitely again thank Justin and Richard for being our correspondents in the field. It was great audio, great interviews. I'm hoping we can expand that. I would love to have a network of people who are sort of our ears on the ground in places around the country and around the world.
Spies.
When stories are going on, I want to hear about it. So it may not be a fit for a particular episode, but I want to know what's going on, and I would love to have people out in the field interviewing people who are on the ground in certain areas. If that's something you're interested in, please email the show, thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. If you're interested in contributing to the show in that way, we definitely would love to have all of the help we can in that respect. So shoot me an email, let me know if you're interested, and we'll talk more about it. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheist. And Ari, this is probably my favorite episode we've ever done, so do not fuck this outro up.
Oh, don't worry. It's good. Okay. Day 22. The isolation is all-consuming. I still have not seen another human since the impact. Just a few stray dogs prowling the wreckage. Today I explored the outer perimeter. No signs of life, but I was able to pick up some supplies from the rubble of what I think used to be a pharmacy. As I dug through the debris, searching for bandages and antiseptic, scenes of the past, of them replayed in my mind. I remembered our conversations over Facebook, the frivolous exchanges of reaction gifs and facetious conservatism. I tried to bring to mind their email address as a last vestige of my memory of them. Yes, it was aristillman4@gmail.com. I wished I would have emailed them that screenplay I was working on, that labor of passion which is now lost forever along with the entire internet. As I unearthed a dirtied package of cough medicine tablets, I spoke to them in my mind, although I no longer believe in an afterlife. I told them I missed them, that I was so sorry that I couldn't save them, that the only thing that kept me going for the first few days after the impact was the episode of the SJW Circle Jerk I still had downloaded on my phone until the battery finally gave out. Now all I have left of them are the echoes of their voice in my mind. I must press on. Tomorrow I will return to the river to replenish my stores of water. For now, I must rest and conserve my strength for the journey ahead.
Brilliant. Outstanding.
As always.
You lived up to it. You really did. I appreciate you. Again, if you want to support the show, support the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto, make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. If you don't have financial stuff to give, that's totally okay. You can head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review. That helps raise our profile, helps us get heard by a lot more people. So it's very, very helpful. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Atheist Manifesto.